are very pleased to be able to do this rededication of the square, something that has been done throughout the city with different squares when areas get rehabbed or new construction goes on into that area, and we've been able, through Mayor Mitchell's office, to continue to go along and rededicate the squares again. So at this time, I would like for the opening remarks to introduce the Mayor of the City of New Bedford, Jonathan Mitchell.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, I guess. Great to see everybody here. As we drove up, I was just thrilled to see a crowd of this size. I know there are lots of Saulniers out there, lots of cousins and, big French family, but this exceeded even my expectations. Well, welcome. I have a few remarks today on this occasion, and it's a solemn one, but it's also a celebratory one. And I wanted first just to thank a few folks and recognize some others. I do want to thank Bob Bromley and the Veterans Advisory Board entirely for their work and caring for all of our veterans monuments and memorials and other tributes. It's a big thing for us here in the city, as all of you know. And that includes the parades as well. So it's that work is a real reflection of our city's values. And so I just want to thank Bob for that work. I want to recognize the city councilors who are here, Linda Morad and Ryan Pereira. Thank you for the support that you offer veterans and those who've served in the armed forces entirely here in the city. And I want to thank DPI and Sylvia De Silva in my office for helping with the physical arrangements here, and DFFM as well. I just will note there's a lot of more work to go on here, but we're at the end of the planting season for those green thumbs out there, and so as you can appreciate, so a lot of this will get done over time, but we wanted to make sure that this looked just so today. So I want to thank everybody who participated in that work. And I want to thank Al Saulnier, who you'll hear from in a moment, along with Suzanne, for all their work in championing this rededication. We went ahead and as you can tell, this public safety center here is something that we built just a few years ago. The first public safety city the city has built, first fire station the city has built in 62 years. So we were a little overdue. So it took some. We won't wait 62 years till we build the next one, but I pointed out only because it does, as Bob noted, we rejiggered the intersection a little bit, and so and that's really the impetus for the rededication. We wanted to sort of bring it back to where it was, and to actually, as you'll see, as I hope you'll agree when we do the unveiling, make it look even better than it was. So I wanted to say a few things today about Roland Saulnier and about the circumstances in which he served and the circumstances more generally of this dedication. And it's just picture, what's one of the interesting things about our city is that it's not difficult in many neighborhoods to picture the way things were 80, 90, 100 years ago. A lot of the housing, we have older housing stock in the city, and with a few exceptions, in this neighborhood, it kind of doesn't look that much different. Obviously, St. Anne's Church was here, along with the school back then, which he attended, by the way, as many of you know. But by and large, it is kind of, it is easy to picture a young Roland Saulnier growing up here, and the extended Saulnier family living here in the South End, and all the things that they contributed to over the years. And so, he was a young man who enlisted in the Army before Pearl Harbor, and was ultimately deployed to the Philippines. And I just want to say a couple words about the circumstances back then. The period in the war that he fought in is often overlooked. It's in the immediate aftermath, the months right after Pearl Harbor, as the United States was slowly ramping up for the big fight. And it wasn't until later in 1942 with the Battle of Midway that things that the United States and the Battle of Guadalcanal later in '42, that the United States really arrived. But in the meantime, there was an awful lot of fighting in the Philippines, and that's where he was. And the thing to take away from this ultimately is that this is a young man who fought with distinction, but also endured some unimaginably dire circumstances. So, in general, in the defense of the Philippines, the plan was for everybody to fall back on Manila Harbor, right? All the huge archipelago of the Philippines couldn't be defended. The Japanese attacked right after Pearl Harbor, and so it was too extensive given the U.S. presence in the Pacific to defend all of it. So they fell back to the main commercial hub, the main political hub, which was Manila, and to protect the harbor. Bataan was a peninsula. Bataan was a peninsula that protruded out near the edge of Manila Harbor, and Corregidor Island, another famous point in the history of that battle, was right there at the mouth of the harbor. These are the two places where the U.S. forces and Filipino forces fell back to. And the Japanese assumption was they'll all cave in real soon and then we'll move on. And there was a real threat at that point in 1942 of an attack on Australia and even beyond. The Japanese had already were taking over Indochina, where Vietnam is, as well as Singapore, had already taken over large swaths of China, of course, and the Korean Peninsula. And so this was a really, really dire time, and it was a time when, frankly, you had, in the case of Roland, someone who really showed off the best of America. It's been said that what won the war, what was decisive for the U.S. In the Second World War were two things: America's vast industrial capacity and the leadership skills of its junior officers and non-commissioned officers, because America was a society that produced natural leaders, just given the melting pot, given the entrepreneurial spirit of the country. And so he was just a great example of that. Someone who was promoted to second lieutenant on the battlefield, got a battlefield promotion commission, and fought with indigenous Filipino troops for months. And the significance of that work was that it delayed the Japanese moving on from the Philippines to other parts of the Pacific Rim that it needed to conquer to sort of defend the empire. And so his contribution, like those of the others he fought with, were significant. Of course, that area fell ultimately to the Japanese. It was too hard for America at that point to resupply, to shore up. So when Bataan fell in April of '42, and then Corregidor a month later, that's when the U.S. suffered its largest capture, or the U.S. lost and had captured, Japanese captured, 75,000 American troops right there. Unprecedented in U.S. history, unmatched since then. And then they suffered all of the depravity of the Bataan Death March, and then from there, the Japanese POW camps and hell ships, which is where Roland was when he ultimately fell 2 years later in '44. I say all this because there's a whole lot of context here, and when you drive by a square like this and you see somebody's name on a plaque, unless you've had some connection to him, in all likelihood you don't know what it was about. And so it really it's really important that we reestablish the record on the occasion of this recommissioning of this monument. He was a brave man. He was a leader. He was a patriot. He was a tough guy who endured and endured and endured. And it is entirely fitting and appropriate that we honor him today, some 80 years after he was lost on the Japanese hell ship Amaru, which was on its way from the Philippines to the Japanese mainland. He was the best of America, the best of New Bedford, and when we dedicate monuments, when we rededicate monuments, the thing to remember is it's as much about the person that is being honored as it is about others who might emulate that person. We want future generations to emulate that example. This is what we want our kids to emulate, the kind of example, the kind of values, the kind of virtue that he exhibited in the last 2 years of his life. And so I'm proud here today to be part of this. I'm proud. I want to thank the Saulnier family, extended family, for your advocacy and your support of this. What your cousin and your uncle did was just magnificent, just outstanding. And we're proud as residents of this great city today to refresh and renew the honor that was bestowed on him at the end of the war in 1946. It's entirely fitting and appropriate that in this age that we do that. So I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchell. At this time, I'd like to call up Councilor in Ward 6. We are basically right in the heart of Ward 6. Ryan Pereira, to say a few words on behalf of the City Council.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today on this beautiful day to rededicate this square to Roland Saulnier, with the last name as synonymous essentially as the South End, as the Saulniers are. Roland was part of America's greatest generation, folks who put their life on the line so that we can, and a little bit vote, so that we can enjoy freedoms that aren't enjoyed around the world. Just doing what was right. Today, that's something interesting to be said, that you don't always see that, but just doing the right thing. Sticking up for freedom. So I'm honored to be a part of here. I'm honored to represent the City Council here today. I'd like to thank the Saulnier family for being here with us. I'd like to thank the Mayor's office and Bob Bromley from the Veterans Advisory Board to help coordinate this. And I think we need to, dedications like this or rededications like this, plaques, is not enough sometimes we really got to remember, tell their story to truly honor the sacrifice that folks like Roland made, especially during that time period. So I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and thank the Saulnier family for being here. God bless you all, and God bless the City of New Bedford. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. At this time, I'm going to introduce one of the Saulnier family members, but I'm going to also add that in addition to being chairman of the city's Veterans Advisory Board, I am one of the last of the founders and board members and the curator of the Fort Taber Fort Rodman Military Museum, and with our name change, Veterans Memorial. We've been in existence for 20 years. 20 years ago, a gentleman walked into the museum, spent about 3 or 4 weekends hanging out with us, and said, "You've got something here that I think is going to really take off over time." And he was correct. And he began coming in with different stories on the French-Canadian veterans who had served in World War II, some of them had served in World War I, and bringing us the stories and photographs. His name is Al Saulnier, and he's going to be coming up right now to talk about his relative, Roland Saulnier.
Thanks, Bob. God, I had almost forgotten that. It was so many years ago. I'm a first cousin, once removed. What that means is that my grandfather was an elder brother to Roland's father. Roland and my dad were first cousins, born less than a year apart in New Bedford. So that's why I'm once removed. And today would have been Roland's 106th birthday. I study history. Bob indicated a little bit of that, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about that today. But first, a special thanks to Mayor Mitchell for making today possible. Don Saulnier and I tried for over 2 years to get some memorial back to Roland. It had been taken down when St. Anne's Church was demolished in order to put in the Public Safety Center. And we were stymied repeatedly. And thinking back on it, I think that the city bureaucrats, or those with a bureaucratic mentality, truly lack a sense of honor for New Bedford's heroes and its heroic institutions. They lack a belief in the greatness and the potential for greatness in New Bedford. They're in the mold of those who were in City Hall when Colonel Greene wanted the Charles W. Morgan to come back to its home port. They said, what do we want with that old wreck? And visionaries in Mystic, Connecticut, however, were glad to take it and turn it into a major tourist attraction. Luckily for us, Mayor Mitchell is not cut from the same cloth. He recognized that the city needs to honor its heroes, both for what they did, as an example for others. And he cut through the layers of bureaucratic inertia, and we see it as a result today. Not a small, almost invisible sign of gray letters on a black background that they decided to put across the street, not at Saulnier Square, which is right here where Ruth and McGirt Street meet Brock Avenue, but over there where Warren Street meets Brock Avenue. To me, that's like putting this new sign in front of the baker downtown that reads City Hall. For the bureaucrats, it would be close enough. No, this was a named city square. It was named by the city council in 1946. The mayor signed a proclamation. They had a huge parade and a dozen speeches. It needed a fitting monument, and today we got it. So thank you, Mayor Mitchell. Roland Saulnier was born 106 years ago today, just before the end of the Great War. He was the third son of Joseph Edmund Saulnier and Rose Hebert, two people of Acadian descent who married here at St. Anne's Church. Roland was the son of the South End. He was born at the Charon Memorial Hospital, or Maternity Hospital, which was over here on Cove Street, known to many, many years later on as the Lamoureux Funeral Home. He was the son of the South End, as seen as his birth announcement 3 days later in the Evening Standard that says, son Roland, to Mr. and Mrs. Edmund Saulnier of 6 Warren Street. 6 Warren Street is the second house over there, which has somebody standing in the doorway. He was the son of the South End who went to St. Anne's School and likely was baptized here, did his first communion here, and most likely his confirmation. He was the son of the South End who learned to shoot at the Sharpshooters Building just a few blocks away. Now everybody knows it as the Orpheum Theater. And he was the son of the South End in that his first job was at the Kilburn Mill, 1 block away on the other side of Clark's Point. But during the war, and after the war, he was more than that. He was a son of New Bedford. The New Bedford Standard Times Archives has 31 clippings about Roland. Let me read you the headlines from a couple of them. New Bedford hero. As the United States follows with absorbed interest General MacArthur's splendid defense in the island of Luzon, and thrills at the countless incidents of personal heroism during the battle, New Bedford takes special pride in the accomplishments of a man from this city, Captain Roland Frenchy Saulnier. Or another one, New Bedford soldier, hero in Philippines. Roland Saulnier jumps from ranks to captain. And an article in the Boston Post summarized it. That's how all New Bedford feels about their soldier boy here. From the gang at the Sharpshooters to the youngsters at St. Anne's School, where Roland once attended, Lieutenant Frenchie is everyone's hero. But he wasn't only a New Bedford hero. He was a national hero. His exploits figured in newspapers throughout the United States. A quick search on newspapers.com reveals articles about him in 41 of the 48 states at the time, plus Hawaii. Let me give you some flavor of that. 2 Massachusetts men come in on baton in the Pittsburgh Press. 2 men from Massachusetts, a brigadier general and a prospective captain who a few weeks ago was a private, have put themselves in the top flight of the officers who made good in General Douglas MacArthur's heroic defense of the Bataan Peninsula. And here's what the author says about Roland. He's leading a battalion now, and for 20 days remained at the front, not in his command post, but in the first line of the trenches with his men. I went out into the jungle looking for Lieutenant Saulnier, but found he had been ordered to hospital because of a stomach ailment. But I also found that he never arrived at the hospital. Instead, he had gone only as far as a divisional first aid station for medicine. Then he had gone back to the front. Or from the Rutland Daily Herald, Lieutenant Frenchie from New Bedford is terror of the front in Philippines. Even the Japs know colorful Roland G. Saulnier, who calls out several times a day from his foxhole on baton to enemy troops, "Hey, you Japanese, come on over here." From their own dug-in positions in the underbrush, only 100 feet from the Filipino-American barbed wire, the Japanese answer, "Profanity you, Furenchi." And I think we all can figure out what 4-letter word starting with F the newspaper put in as profanity. But he wasn't only a US hero. As it turns out, the Canadians claimed him as well. In La Presse in Montreal, there's a 2-column article about his exploits. And it's not until the 2nd column that we find out where he's from. The headline of the article is "Un héros canadien," a Canadian hero. Subheading, Lieutenant Roland Saulnier commands Filipino troops in Bataan. Or in La Patrie, also from Montreal, the fatherland. Headline, young French-Canadian hero in the Philippines. And then we get down and we see a young Franco-American, 24 years old, Roland Saulnier, son of French-Canadian parents from New Bedford and lieutenant in the American Army, acquired a widespread reputation among the Filipino defenders as a resourceful and fearless officer. That's stretching it. The word in French is débrouillard, and dictionaries translate it as resourceful, but it means a lot more than that. It means someone who's got the skills to adapt to any situation, come what may. And it means somebody who's attacking or defending using plan A, already has plan B in mind, and within seconds can come up with a plan C, D, or E, depending on what happens. Two Canadian newspapers were so struck with what he was doing that they printed a 10-generation genealogy of Roland. One of them Le Devoir, also in Montreal, is entitled The History of the Saulnier Family, subheading About Roland Saulnier, the hero of the Philippines. And it traces the ancestry all the way back to our ancestors who arrived in Acadia between 1686 and 1693. Another newspaper really took off on the fact that he had an Acadian background. Le Canada, another Montreal newspaper, had an article entitled "For Acadians." And while it mentions Roland, it also goes back to the 6 Saulnier family members who were interned in the church in Grand Pré during the major ethnic cleansing in 1755, when they were cleared out of their lands, sent into exile, their homes burned and their livestock slaughtered. And the article ends, "And the unfortunate fate of his distant ancestors under the boot of the oppressive conqueror perhaps explains today why Roland is such a fire spitter." Kashfir, it's a wonderful expression. But his exploits were also recognized elsewhere. I found an article in the Sun newspaper in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, talking about Frenchy. And it talked about his being one of the people who helped stymie the Japanese from their early excursion into Bataan. An American foreign correspondent, Linton Wells, wrote about him in a book called Salute to Valor. It's a book that looks at heroes of the US forces, of the British forces, of the Dutch forces, of the Russian forces, and the Chinese forces. And Frenchy's in there. And it says some of the reports that have come out of Bataan seem almost legendary. The case of Lieutenant Frenchy Saulnier of New Bedford, who became known as a one-man army, is an example. He started as a private and became a captain. And some of the exploits are in there. One of them, when they were trying to escape from the Japanese, he led his forces jumping down a 30-foot cliff. Or another time when he was pinned with a couple of his men into a foxhole, and supposedly Roland killed 10 of the enemy with his pistol. But the most interesting one for me was an article in a professional journal called the Infantry Journal. It's a professional journal of the U.S. Infantry, comes out of the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And the article is entitled Lessons of Bataan, written by Colonel Milton Hill, when it was written after his evacuation with General MacArthur to Australia. He was part of the Inspector General's Corps. He looked at training, he looked at preparedness, he looked at supplies, he looked at foodstuffs, he looked at property, he looked at war techniques from the US forces and somewhat less the Japanese forces. And in that article, he only talked about one man. I think you know who it was. He said, "I've not intended to take up space in this account by telling of individual exploits. There are many fine deeds, but others have done a better job than I possibly could in telling about them. However, I don't think the story of Frenchy Saulnier has been told, and it should be told. Frenchy Saulnier was an American private who somehow took command of a battalion of the Philippine Army in battle. The unit had had losses and was for a time without direction. And Frenchy took it in hand and straightened it out. Since his army commander had earlier received a report on Frenchy telling how he had assisted the artillery by taking over liaison duties and ordering the fire moved up further and further until it was almost on his own position, but right on the enemy's, The Army commander recommended that Frenchy Saulnier be commissioned as a major. He had proved in battle that he could handle the job, but it finally worked out that Frenchy was made a lieutenant. He was one of those natural leaders of men in combat every war brings out. He was later decorated, I believe. Everybody said that Frenchy Saulnier was a natural. I want to mention one more book that talks about Frenchy. It's not yet published. It's this book here, my latest. It will be coming out shortly, put out by Spinner Publications, called The French of New Bedford. And in it, I go up to the end of the Great Depression, or the beginning of the Great Depression, I'm sorry, and the end of the textile strike, 1928. Now, obviously, that's before World War II. So what I did in the concluding chapter was to talk about threads, possible threads for further research. And one of those possible threads is the experience of New Bedford's French in World War II, which gave me a chance to mention Frenchy. His parents are also in there. His father was a tailor, so he shows up in the section on tailors in the book. And Dr. Charon, who delivered him, and the Sharon Maternity Hospital are in there in the section of doctors. So today we came together to honor Roland Saulnier. Some of us came because he was indeed a family hero. Others came because he was a son of the South End. Some came because he was an authentic New Bedford hero. But we've seen this afternoon that he was far more than that. He was a national hero. He was a French-Canadian hero. He was a true international hero. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Next, another one of Ron's relatives. I'd like to introduce Nancy Pimentel, who will say a few more words about Roland. And I also gave her a charge before we started today's program. She does have a lot more material that she could bring down to the Military Museum so we can have copies and have that on hand for future reference. Nancy.
I thank everyone for being here today. It's very important. I want to thank Mayor Mitchell and everyone that had a lot of endeavors in this. Wow, here we are at the very spot that was known as Saulnier Square. Roland was my father's younger brother, and my brother is named after Roland Saulnier, but he could not be here today because he's not well. It was dedicated to my uncle and my father's, my brother. We're a very, very close-knit family. He was only 26 when he died. He was called Frenchy because, of course, he could speak French, and he was a legend in the war, the New Bedford widely known hero, until he was killed in action. In October 24th of 1940, along with other courageous ones that lost their life in history for this country, a large crowd gathered here, that dedication with marching, parade units, many notable speakers to pay tribute to the memory of Roland. The family is so grateful that this rededication to my uncle has returned to its original spot. And may we forever be remembered as we pass all the monuments and stones and plaques in this city, that all these fallen veterans fought for our freedom, and that our freedom is made possible by the loyal Americans that sacrificed their lives for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. At this time, I'd like to have both Al, Nancy, along with the mayor, City Council Ryan Pereira, and Linda Moran, if you'd like to do the unveiling of the new memorial.
mind standing?
Yep, right towards the back there. Now, can you go over this way here? Lift it from.
Make sure everybody's ready with their cameras. We'll just pull it back on the screen. Ready?
Assisting was Paul Souza, who's one of the board members with me on the Veterans Advisory Board, as well as at the Military Museum. In closing today's service, I'd like to bring forward City Councilor at Large Linda Moran to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will use the flag that's right in front of the Public Safety Facility.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today with the family and relatives and friends to rededicate this monument, and it's a privilege to lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you can stand, please do so and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America.
That concludes our rededication program today, and in a couple of weeks, we hope to see you all at our Veterans Day services and parade on November 11th. Thank you.